the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake the Attorney Mason. We'll talk a lot of college basketball. The Reds pitchers and catchers have reported. Full squad workout is around the corner. Actually, first spring training game a week from Saturday. We got maybe a little Bengals to talk about, not a whole lot, but we do have a lot of college basketball to get to, Rick, as we wind through the conference season here in February. You are actually on the road after last night's. We're doing this on a Thursday morning. Big win for NKU over Green Bay. They got a couple of days before they play Milwaukee, so you got a couple of days. Without having to get up in the middle of the night and feed a baby. That's probably the biggest part for you.
I wasn't going to advertise that in case my wife tuned into this, but yeah, I'm not too disappointed about that. It's kind of a nice break from the dog and the baby at times, but I will say, everyone's getting excited back home about pitchers and catchers reporting, and I have to say, being in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and watching college basketball, kind of hard to get into pitchers and catchers in spring training mode for me.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like it gets earlier and earlier, does it not? Like the first spring training game used to start maybe the last day of February. Now we're like a week before that. The regular season starts a week before it used to. It feels like everything gets pushed up.
Yeah, it comes quicker and quicker every year, and I'm never ready for it because I'm always in college basketball mode this time of year. But we'll address that later in the show. We'll also talk about it a lot more as we get closer to the start of Major League Baseball season. But Skinny, first of all, college basketball. The big news this week happened on Wednesday when Ohio State fired Chris Holtmann as the head coach. And the rumor mill right away started swirling. Obviously, Ohio State isn't one of the teams we typically talk about on here, but two of the local coaches have been swept up in those rumors, with Sean Miller and Wes Miller both being speculated about as potential candidates for that Ohio State job. So let's start right there. What are your thoughts on Ohio State's basketball coaching search that is about to get underway here?
I'm not here trying to throw dirt on somebody, but how is Wes Miller a candidate for what has he done at a high level that would warrant him being the next head coach at Ohio State? And I say that because I got an odds thing yesterday, Rick. I know when you were in this business, and maybe you still do, we get stuff from Bet Online AG that I like. I turn them into news stories. I find them interesting. And again, if you can localize them, that's the better part of it. But yesterday, somebody from BetOhio.com sent me.
Yeah, what is BetOhio.com? First of all, there's nothing. I've never heard of that.
Did you get this, or did you just see somebody put it out there too?
I saw that on Twitter. Yeah.
All right. I'm just gonna read off the candidates with their odds. The favorite, according to Bet Ohio, and again, this is just their opinion. They're trying to land people to bet on this thing.
But they're not even a sports book, though. What are they getting out of this? I don't get it.
It's a great question. Wes Miller at 4.5 to 1, Sean Miller at 7 to 1, Dusty May, the head coach at Florida Atlantic, at 10 to 1. Lamont Paris, who's going to be a hot name for a lot of jobs, the current South Carolina head coach. I would warn people, though, again, let's get a little more body of work before we jump in with both feet there. But again, he is going to be a hot name for sure. 12 to 1. Anthony Grant at 12 to 1. Pat Kelsey, who's the Charleston head coach, local product, he is 15 to 1. Will Wade, the wild card from McNeese State, he's at 15 to 1 as well. And then the field is 2.5 to 1. So technically the field is actually the favorite to land that job. But again, I go back to this. We'll get into the Sean Miller part in a second, but how would Wes Miller be a favorite for that job?
Well, first of all, let me say, I do not think those are real odds of any sort.
Agreed.
Looking at that, I think that was just made up for entertainment purposes to get people talking about something. And I mean, the fact that the other or unnamed was the leading candidate here kind of tells you all you need to know about where we're at in this process. Your point about Wes Miller, not only has he not achieved a whole lot, but I think the bigger point there is, if you're a Cincinnati fan, I wouldn't be worried about losing Wes Miller for either reason, because he had a ton of success or because he did poorly. UC can't fire him because his buyout's too big. And most schools aren't going to pay $10 million, which is what the current buyout would be if he were to leave Cincinnati. So we talked about it a lot when John Cunningham announced that contract extension right after he had lost to NKU and Xavier in short succession there last season, that it was kind of weird to announce it at that time and give him a big extension with a big buyout. But the good news is, if you're a UC fan and you want to keep Wes Miller, he's not going anywhere because of that, in my opinion. I just can't see it happening. I know these schools pay a lot of money for football coach buyouts, but I mean, Ohio State just paid upwards of $15 million to get rid of Chris Holtmann, in addition to all the money they're spending on football right now. The idea that they're also going to pay a big buyout to get a coach whom, no offense, is not probably one of the top names that you'd be seeking in this year's coaching carousel, in Wes Miller, I just don't see that being a reasonable possibility.
I don't either. And again, I truly mean it. I hope Wes Miller has success at Cincinnati. I hope he's the guy that for Cincinnati fans, leads them back to the tournament on a consistent basis, has success, all those things. But he hasn't done that yet. I know it's a small sample size, but when when I saw that yesterday and it came across, I didn't even put anything up about it. I just laughed out loud. I went, what are we doing? Are you trying to patronize to my marketplace with this? Is this what this is about, my man, whoever sent this to me? That's what it felt like.
Yeah, I think it was very much that. I mean, it came from OhioBet.com or whatever you said it was.
BetOhio.
BetOhio.com, which none of us have ever heard of before yesterday when they sent this out. And the two leading candidates were two Ohio coaches. So, I mean, it kind of tells you where they were headed with that, I think. But that being said, the whole Wes Miller thing, I don't think is real. The Sean Miller thing is a little bit different. And it wasn't just BetOhio that put those odds out that got
Correct.
Sean Miller going.
National writers did too. They
put together and Rob Doster and even Shirley Donovan, if you're really in the college basketball weeds, a burner account on Twitter who Rick Pitino had a great quote about this guy earlier in the year, said he must be in our meetings because he's saying things minutes after I say them in a meeting or before I've even said them or something along those lines. So Shirley Donovan has been harping on this for over a month now that Sean Miller will be interested in some of the bigger jobs that open up, not just Ohio State, but Ohio State was certainly one of the ones that he had mentioned. So this has been circulating a little bit about Sean Miller for a few weeks now. And part of the thing with Sean Miller, we just mentioned Wes Miller's big buyout that he has. I've been told Sean Miller's buyout is much smaller. And so that's part of what makes Sean Miller a more attractive candidate to some of these schools is not only has he proven some things, whether it be his first stint at Xavier or the success he had at Arizona before things went south there. But even last year, he got Xavier back to the Sweet 16 and kind of showed that he's still a top coach in America. So he's going to be attractive from that standpoint, but also the standpoint that he's gettable. If you can afford that buyout and you feel like you can get him away from Xavier, if you're a top program like that, then you're going to go after Sean Miller. So I think there are some legs to that. At the same time, talking to people around Xavier yesterday, I would tell you like the top brass at Xavier are not in panic mode right now. They don't believe that Sean Miller is leaving. At the same time, there have definitely been conversations that we need to give Sean Miller more resources and we need to try to up his NIL budget to get it to be competitive with the top teams in the Big East so that he's not going to be looking to leave every offseason.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question for you of how tenuous is that and how viable is that they can up that NIL, because if you're him and you're looking at this team as it is right now, and this year was just a wonky year as we know because of a couple of different things, but if they they can say they're going to up the NIL, the question is can you, how do you? And if he feels like they can't do it enough to really compete in the upper echelon of the Big East, does that become the deciding factor for him to say, I'm not going to, I know you guys are thinking we can do this. I know they have that at Ohio State.
Yeah, it's interesting, Skinny, because obviously the NIL and the actual resources for your program are coming from two separate places, right? Like what you're spending on your program's travel and your facilities and all that stuff is coming from the university. That is a budget line item at Ohio State or at Xavier. NIL stuff is coming from outside donations, collectives that are fundraising for this. And so it gets a little bit of gray area there because the schools are talking to these collectives and they are kind of like, I won't say dictating, but they are asking for help with certain things and telling them what they need for certain things. And so there is a little bit of crossover there. And a lot of times you're asking the same donors to donate to the school's causes as well as the NIL causes. And so there's some donor fatigue there, I think, and schools are certainly worried about that. And at Xavier, I mean, they're at a crossroads with the entire university. They're trying to build this new medical school and do these other things to increase enrollment and really grow Xavier University, not just from the basketball and athletic standpoint, but across the board. And so I think there are some concerns about like what message does it send to keep giving more NIL dollars to college basketball players and the basketball program when we're trying to raise money for important other things and we're in a budget crisis and all that. So there's just a lot going on at Xavier, I think, in general, and that all adds up to what we're talking about with the basketball thing here. And I think to your question about can they get the NIL number up to where it's competitive with the top of the Big East, there's no doubt that they can do that. I think there has been a little bit of a hesitancy from the Xavier side of things, the athletic department, to okay all of those things and approve those budgets because of what I just mentioned. There are other factors going into it, and they're maybe worried about sending the wrong message. So it's very complicated in terms of the NIL piece and the overall resources that are being dedicated to the basketball program right now. And I think not all of this adds up to me because like we're talking about NIL being the main reason he might want to leave, right? Well, Xavier's two big misses in the transfer portal last year that were contributed to NIL were to Gonzaga and Memphis. Xavier hasn't beat out Gonzaga and Memphis in very many recruiting battles in the history of the program. So I'm not sure if last year was like a clear sign that Xavier can no longer compete because of the NIL budget.
But can Ohio State, if you're Sean Miller, can Ohio State?
Of course. I mean, NIL,
Right.
NIL and Xavier's NIL currently is in a better spot than Ohio State's is with Chris Holtmann. But with the right coach, Ohio State's fan base and donors and alumni, they can write that coach basically a blank check in NIL. He can get as much as he needs for the right coach if they believe in him and they trust him. And in terms of resources, I know there was a report by The Athletic yesterday that Xavier outspent Ohio State by $4 million. If you believe that, I've got a nice oceanfront property in Cincinnati that you'd be really interested in. That's just creative accounting. That's just a bookkeeper pushing numbers in a different way. Those numbers that you see reported like that mean absolutely nothing. There is zero chance that Xavier outspent Ohio State in basketball spending last year. That's just not the case. So there's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to these coaching searches types of things. When people are starting to compare this job versus this job and why it's a better situation, a lot of the stuff that fans hear or believe is just completely false. And some of it's even reported by respected sources like The Athletic. It's just people who don't know what they're talking about, quite honestly.
All right, let me throw this rock down the road at you, if you will. Let's say Sean Miller does take Ohio State. What does Xavier do at that point? Because a certain coach last week said he's interested in coaching again.
I don't think that's crazy. I think Chris Mack is a real option. And in fact, I was talking to a lot of people yesterday, but a few important donors, and two of them mentioned that exact thing to me without it even being brought up. I didn't say it. I didn't say, who do you think they'd go after? They just said, hey, if it happens this offseason, wouldn't be the worst time because Chris Mack's still available. We'd go get him in a heartbeat. So I'm not saying that's how everybody at Xavier feels.
Sure.
But at least two people I talked to yesterday that are influential and will have a say in this were absolutely thinking down that track. So I think everyone is on the mindset of let's keep Sean Miller. Let's do everything we can to keep Sean Miller. That is the priority. But if something were to happen, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Chris Mack's name is brought into the mix.
One other point to Chris Mack I'll ask you about, and again, I'm throwing this rock 9 miles down the road. I fully understand that. Anthony Grant's having pretty good success at Dayton. Had a chance the year of COVID to, who knows what that team would have done. They would have gone in as a number 1 seed for sure. So he's done some really good things. Didn't have great success at Alabama. He kind of cycled through the mid-major to the major, back to the mid-major. Maybe another bite of the apple for him. Would Chris be not only a candidate at Dayton? Do you think he'd consider that?
At Dayton?
Yeah.
First of all, I don't know that Anthony Grant's leaving. I just haven't heard that from anyone. It seems like his name.
I'm probably with you. Again, he's on. I've seen him not just on the Bet Ohio list, but he was on a couple of other lists I looked at. So
yeah, I mean, it probably should with all the success he's had, but it seems like maybe there are some personal things there, personal reasons why people believe he may not be interested in leaving. But if that were to happen, it would seem like Dayton is a pretty good spot if you're a basketball coach that wants to step right in and have success right away and know you'll have support and resources to work with.
Build your resume back up.
The question is, can Chris Mack, swallow the whole Xavier Dayton rivalry and the way things, I know there was a point where they returned there and the fans were saying things to his wife and all that. So I just don't know if that can all be repaired and if he can deal with that, but
I've seen people, and we know the animosity from Kentucky, Louisville. Obviously, Rick Pitino going to Louisville. But I've even seen on message boards Kentucky fans saying, "Bring him back, and you know how much they hated him for doing what he did at Louisville. So it's one of those things where you can say that, but when push comes to shove, and if you believe that dude's a good coach, yeah, we'll take you.
Oh, the Dayton people, I think, would take Chris Mack in a heartbeat if they needed a coach. The question is that the opportunity Chris wants, an A-10 job and being, back at Dayton where there's just so much familiarity and in the past, presumably hatred between the two parties. But I mean, like you said, these are adults making adult decisions for millions of dollars. I don't know that that's going to be enough to hold him back from taking that job. That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that one. Well, let's move on here, Skitty, to some of the actual teams. I think that fully covers the coaching search, but NKU, we'll start with them because all the other local teams lost games recently.
Rick, you know what? I do mean to bring up one more point on that. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
that's on me. What do you think of the timing of this?
The fact that it's happening before the season's over, you mean? Yeah. With a month left? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the part of this that seems new. I don't recall a lot of high major coaches losing the job with a month of the season left, and then it feels like we're in full-fledged coaching carousel mode right now.
Right
all
now.
of a sudden.
Yeah.
And we still have a lot. I mean, I know there was the weird situation last year with Georgetown and Ed Cooley, and I don't think that was handled very well personally. It seemed like that really tanked the end of Providence's season, and that news got out there. Ed Cooley had his house on the market before, everyone knew about it before the season was over and everything. So that news got out there pretty quickly, and it became a real disaster for Providence. I don't know how much of a benefit this is to the coach to the programs that are making the firing ahead of time. I mean, I guess in theory, you're able to vet all your candidates earlier and you get your first pick when the season does end for all the other teams. But if you're trying to get the best coach, most of those guys are going to be playing in the NCAA tournament.
Correct.
You're waiting a month and then more time. It just seems like a long time to go through this entire process. Now, maybe it does give you more freedom to vet candidates and talk to them ahead of time and all that. But I just don't like it. That's for sure. It seems like it's going to be a bit of a problem for a lot of programs.
Yeah, I understand the DePaul one, I guess. I mean, that would almost seem like that was writing on the wall no matter what. But this one, again, Ohio State's not 3-20 something. They're still above 500. They suck in the Big Ten. But I think you let the guy fight it out. Maybe that's what they're afraid of, is he fights it out, somehow squeaks into the tournament with a great run at the end, and they still don't want him. I mean, it just seemed weird.
I also wonder, Skinny, with the NIL situation being so important and more donors feeling like they have a bigger say, because it's like, well, you need $500,000 from me to get this NIL thing done. I'm going to have a say in what's going on then. Guess what? The patience and the fan climate right now across the board, doesn't matter what school you're at. It's just every game is, our coach sucks, fire him, the program's over with, or we're winning a national championship. And I mean, there's no in between for any fan base at all in America anymore. There's no nuance. There's no storylines. It's just every game, live or die. Everything sucks or everything's great. And so I think that's going all the way up to like the donor level. You're not good in 2 years. You're gone now. You don't get 4 years to figure this thing out anymore. Not with the transfer portal and all the money I'm pouring into NIL.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some of these games, though, because we've got a lot of them, and it wasn't good for the local teams, aside from the NKU Norse. They beat Oakland, who was tied for first. Then they beat Detroit, as Marquez works at the school's all-time scoring record on Saturday.
By the way, congrats to Detroit. Congrats to Detroit for winning.
They did get their first win on Valentine's Day on Wednesday, and that was at the same time that the Norse took down Green Bay at Green Bay. Green Bay was alone in first place in the Horizon League when NKU beat them on Wednesday night. So the Norse are now tied with Wright State for fourth place in the conference. Obviously, top four in the Horizon League, get a first-round bye in the conference tournament, and get the home game in the quarterfinals. So that you want to be in the top four. That's a big part of it. NKU is down the stretch, Skinny. I think they have a lighter schedule, too, than Wright State, Milwaukee, or Cleveland State, which are the teams either tied with them in Wright State's case or right below them that they're kind of fighting out for that top four spot. So I would say right now things are looking pretty good for NKU as we head down the stretch.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the Green Bay game, I mean, how many games do you think that you would have thought this team wins with Marquez Warwick scoring 7 points? Now you got the game winner. It was a great play to get the game winner. That's still a clutch play, but still to win on the road against the first place team in the league with your go-to guy, your main guy, your scoring threat getting 7, I would have never believed that.
Skinny. He and Trey Robinson, who I would, you can argue some other guys have really stepped up here, but coming into the year, those were certainly two of your more experienced players, along with Sam Vincent and two of your top players. And even still now, those are two of your top players without a doubt. They combined to go 6 for 27 in this game.
On
and
the
Sam
road,
Vincent isn't playing. On the road against the top team in the conference, and they found a way to gut out a win. And that's the thing that I go back to with this NKU team is they've been trying to score more this year, and they've shown in games that get up tempo that they can outscore teams when they're playing at that pace. But they've also have this matchup zone defense that they've been really good with, and they've won for the last 3 years, grinding games out in the 50s or low 60s, playing that way. So that's not unfamiliar to them when a team like Green Bay tries to slow it down. I see other teams in this conference that they want to play one way. They have their style, and they have to do that. NKU seems like they can play a lot of different styles, and they're not the most consistent team, but when they're at their best, it seems like they can win almost any way.
Yeah, I mean, they win the Oakland game. I know it went to overtime. That's why the score is a little inflated, but it wasn't completely inflated because of overtime. That was a high-scoring game. Detroit's Detroit. They are what they are. I mean, we just mentioned they just won their first game of the season. Then last night you win a game in the 50s. And let's face it, in March, I think you do have to find ways. Sometimes those games are going to get in the other team makes a bunch of shots. You better match it. Game gets grinded out. You better get stops. And I do think that. I will say this, Rick, after watching the debacle that was the last, 11 or 10 minutes against Wright State, I kind of felt this team was almost dead in the water. And to bounce back the way they have, and I know Detroit was part of the 3-game winning streak, but to bounce back the way they have, that's a great sign at this time of year.
I couldn't agree more, Skin. You had that stretch where they lost 3 in a row. And 2 of the games, I don't think they played very well. Definitely not at Youngstown State. And then the game against Wright State that you're talking about, it definitely didn't go their way down the stretch of that one. And so there were concerns without a doubt, but see them bounce back, win 3 straight. And again, it's always with this program, like starting in June when they're there for workouts, it's like we have to be our best for 3 days in March. It's all they talk about. And I think that does work. I think there's something to that. They've clearly had success doing it the last few years since the staff has been here.
Yeah, how much do you think for Darren Horn that helps him avoid highs and lows? And maybe he's a guy that always avoids them anyway. But again, even as coaches, we ride the highs and lows, right? Especially when you're on the high, you're trying not to let your team get too emotionally like, hey, we're really good. We're just going to roll out and go. And vice versa, when you're losing, you don't want to get so tight that you can't find a way to bounce back. How much do you think that he embraces that? Does that help?
I think it's twofold. One, it helps the players with that exact thing. No loss is too big of a deal. I mean, if you go back to his first year, they lost by 30 to UIC around this time of year. And then they finished off the season well and won the conference tournament that year. This year, obviously, they had that embarrassing loss at Youngstown State. And right away, they've turned it right back around and they've started playing good basketball again. So it seems like, to your point, they don't let those lows become a huge thing that tanks their season. And the other thing that I think it helps him with personally is he doesn't seem too worried about grinding out every possession and every possession having to matter. It feels like a lot of other coaches maybe won't try a guy early in the year or maybe even the middle of the year because, well, we're in a tight game. This game matters, and we don't want to give away 6 possessions here if he screws up. Darren Horn doesn't do that. If you're not playing well, he'll bench you. You might not get in for an entire game. If you haven't played in 2 weeks, he might start you the next game because you had a good week of practice, and he's not worried about we have to win every single game during the regular season when we're playing in a 1-bid conference. And I think that works. And case in point this year, look at Randall Pettis, the freshman guard. Earlier in the season, he couldn't get off the bench. Jeremiah Israel was ahead of him, and it looked like he might not play at all this year. And now he's had 8 straight games where he's made a 3-pointer. He's had, he's been in double figures in 6 of the last 8 games, and he's making key plays down the stretch in just about every win that they've had, including leave him on the floor for the last possession on defense so we can help you there. And I mean, when you're telling me they have enough trust to leave him out there in the final possessions of games compared to where he was back in December, it's incredible how far that's come. But that only happens if you have the confidence to put him in game situations throughout the course of the season.
Exactly.
The last question here, and this got brought up to me. Of course, it's going to when you have one the school's all-time leading scorer surpass the former all-time leading scorer. And the great thing about Marquez Warwick and Drew McDonald, Skinny, is they've played in a similar era. They're not the same type of players, but typically when you have an all-time leading scorer get surpassed, one guy played 30 or 40 years ago and the new guy plays in a new era. And it's like, well, you can't really compare their games. It's a new conference that you're in or what have you. But in this case, they both played in the Horizon League. They both played in the last 10 years of basketball. I mean, Drew McDonald just set his record 6 years ago. Who do you got, Marquez Warwick or Drew McDonald, as the best all-time player in NKU history?
My goodness. I'm going Brady Jackson from back in the 1980s, actually, is the best player in NKU.
Okay, that's fair. I've heard some other people say that too. So who do you got between Drew or Quez as the best overall player?
That's a fair point. Let's call it the Division I era, right? We'll go.
Division I era best player of all time.
I'm going to go Drew because I think he was a little more efficient offensively. I thought that, he obviously had to be a big part of what they did on the glass. They weren't an overly big team, and he played the 5, although it was an untraditional 5 because he played a lot out on the floor and could make the 3. I'm going to go with Drew.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough because they are such different players, Drew being a big man and Quez being a guard. But the one thing about Drew is it felt like he elevated everybody around him because of his IQ and his passing ability. He was he was the perfect trail 5. I mean, the perfect. If you said, I'm going to drop a trail 5 who's going to look like he plays in the YMCA and can't do much else, he's the guy.
But to your point, he could knock down a 3 in trail. He could quickly get you in your offense in trail. That's why, to me, he just does a little bit more. And I don't want that to be a besmirch on Marquez at all, because I think he's a terrific player too. Just to your point, in a much different way.
Yeah, they are so different, and Marquez has been so good. I mean, if you want to talk about showing up and seeing special moments and incredible game winners and stuff like that, Marquez has had the more impressive career in that regard. I mean, there's been a lot more times where you show up, you watch what he does, or you watch him win a game like he did last night, and you just shake your head like, this dude's unbelievable in those moments. But I get your point about Drew too, because in some ways it felt like he did more overall. But again, they played in the same era too. It feels like NKU is kind of at a different spot because they were so new to Division I when Drew was here, and it didn't feel like the overall athleticism and talent around him were as good. But they were in the Horizon League and they were doing the same things that this team is doing. So it is pretty much an apples to apples comparison. It's a great debate. I'd be interested in hearing where anyone else stands on it, because I don't have a great answer there.
Old timers will get you some Brady Jackson, though. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, they will. And I respect that. I didn't watch Brady Jackson, obviously, so it's tough for me to weigh in on that conversation, but I know he was great as well. But for me, it's tough to go Division II versus Division I and have a real comparison there. All right, number 22, Kentucky. They've dropped another 5 spots in the poll. Lost to Gonzaga 89-85, and then beat Ole Miss 75-63 this week. They play at number 13, Auburn, on Saturday at 6 p.m. Skinny, I guess the good news with the win over Ole Miss is they got it done with defense finally. Onyenso tied the Rupp Arena record for blocked shots with 10. They held Ole Miss to 63 points, well under a point per possession. I think they were about 0.8 in that game. So that's something that UK hasn't done much this season. At the same time, with what they've shown us with those 3 straight losses at Rupp Arena and the way they've struggled in big games recently, Tennessee and Gonzaga most specifically, I've lost a lot of faith in this team in terms of them being a serious contender in March Madness.
I am too, except the other caveat you can get is Tuesday was the first time all year they played at full strength. Now, then they also lost Trey Mitchell to a shoulder injury, so we don't know where that's going to go. I do think they missed DJ Wagner in ways, especially on the defensive end, more than I thought that they would. And I'm not making excuses here. I mean, the Gonzaga, the Gonzaga game, to me, was squarely on John Calipari in many ways. I mean, good Lord, how many times can you just let a guy catch a ball in the post, turn and score without doing something different? And that lob play at the end of the game is truly – I watched it in real time with a couple coaches. We were getting ready to coach again. I literally said, would you have drawn that up? And he looked at me and goes, no. And this was somebody who coached in college too. I go, that's the dumbest damn play I've ever seen in my lifetime in that key spot. And especially the way Reed Sheppard was playing the second half. That loss is squarely on Cal. And boy, I'll tell you what, if they had not come back to beat Ole Miss, fan base was quickly ready to turn. They've been closing in on that. You lose another one in Rupp, I can't imagine what the rest of this season would have been like.
I know. And that's the thing for UK. We've talked about it, that the rest of this regular season feels rather unimportant because it's all going to be about what they do.
Other than getting seed. Yeah. Other than getting a seed.
Unless they tank, though.
Right.
I mean, if they would have really tanked this thing, then it would have gotten incredibly ugly down the stretch here. The Ole Miss win feels like it stabilized them a little bit, but Skinny, I don't have any confidence in this team in big games anymore. If they're playing a good team where it feels like a big game, like, I mean, even this weekend at Auburn, I don't have any confidence that Kentucky is going to win that. That would be a huge win for them, but going into it, I've lost any confidence that they can win games like that.
These next 4 games, Rick, they could go 0-4. I don't think they do, but they certainly could. At Auburn, at LSU, and LSU isn't good, but Kentucky hasn't exactly proven to be stalwart on the road to this point. Their I guess, big road win in the SEC was the 2-pointer at Florida, but they also scuffled at Arkansas to win, and Arkansas is dreadful. Then they're home to Alabama, and then they're at Mississippi State. I mean, you go 0-4 at that point, you're still going to be a tournament team because then they've got Mississippi State at home and Arkansas at home after that, and then they finish at so they got Arkansas, then Vandy, and then they finish at Tennessee. So at the very worst, they're getting to 19 wins. I mean, at the very worst. And I don't think it's going to be – it'll be 2021, and I still think there'll be a 6 or 7 seed. But, again, this thing still has a chance to go south.
Yeah, it does. And you mentioned the thing about the starters not being back. I know – or the starters finally being back for the first time the other night. I know Cal's made a big deal about that, but you had Trey Mitchell miss a few games. You had DJ Wagner miss a few games. I I know Trey Mitchell is a nice player. I just don't know that those two guys are making enough of a difference for this team.
I think they do on the defensive end. I think that's where they miss some of that, to be honest with you. And they're two end players. Like Fierro's a one end player to me. Onyenso is probably a one end player, but he's kind of an elite one end player where you need him to be elite at that one end. So I do think they help. But to your point, again, kind of like you asked me about going to the Gonzaga game after they beat Vandy, do you think they're back? And I said, no. We both said they need to prove it against Gonzaga at home, and they didn't. So now show me something going to Auburn. Show me something against Alabama, which is one of the best offensive teams in the country. Show me something at Mississippi State. Even show me something at LSU, for goodness sakes. Show me that, and I'll believe it. But until then, again, the Ole Miss game didn't move the needle much for me, other than, again, you finally got your guys back, and a couple of them, to me, do matter. I think Trey Mitchell does matter. I think DJ Wagner does matter. But, again, do they matter enough to win elite games?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think those guys make a big enough difference to fix all your issues, but I do wonder if just the amount of guys being in and out and not having the same group and being cohesive enough has hurt this defense over the long haul this year. And because to me, that's what Cal's always been best at. He's never been like some great tactician on the offensive end that runs a bunch of great set plays or anything in end of game situations like everyone's complaining about now. It's always been that he has found a way to get these one and done, highly talented freshmen to come in and defend together at a high level in a short amount of time, which is very hard to do. I think that is a very difficult thing to do as a head coach, and that's been his specialty in the past. It hasn't worked with this group. I know some people have talked about it kind of being a mentality for some of these younger guys that maybe they just don't get it. But I do wonder if maybe, to Cal's point about the lineup, having the starters finally back, if it's more about that, of just the cohesiveness and constantly having a different group out there from game to game just wears on you and your communication.
And I honestly believe cohesiveness means more on the defensive end than it does the offensive end.
I would agree with that. Yeah, it's because, I mean, you learn to trust where a teammate's going to be and how they're going to react in a help position and things like that. And you kind of, that's chemistry, right? Yeah, that's what we talk about when we say you build chemistry. You kind of understand and trust your teammates. And if you've got a new one back behind you every time, it probably is a little bit more difficult to figure that all out.
Yeah, I don't have to help on a cutter because Onyenso's at the rim. I can stay on my guy who's a 42% three-point shooter. I don't have to give up the quick kick-out three. I mean, those are things I think you only learn by playing with each other. And to that point, they just haven't done that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Cincinnati, who lost to number 3 Houston 67-62, and then lost on Tuesday at home to number 10 Iowa State 68-59. The Bearcats will play at UCF on Saturday at 4 p.m. Skinny, explain to me why UC is still starting 2 big men.
It's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there's a great explanation for that. I know people want to see Day and Jizzle together. I will say they also combined for 11 turnovers against the Iowa State team that doesn't exactly put a ton of pressure on you. I mean, so some of that, I don't know the answer to that. To me, and maybe part of that too is to the point of why are you doing that? Maybe if you stop doing that and maybe just start your 5. But I get always trying to have a scorer come off the bench. I really do. I think that's important. I don't want 5 scorers on the floor to start a game and have nobody be able to come off the bench. Because when I start to go to a rotation, suddenly you're down to 2 scorers on the floor. I'd rather mix it up a little bit. But I'd also like to start damn close to my best 5. And Dan Skillings has to be in that best 5 group to me at all times. John Newman's in that best 5. Pick your point guard. I mean, if it's Jizzle at this point, great. It's Jizzle at this point. And again, the bigs, unfortunately, right now, Victor Locken is done. He's toast. For whatever he tried to be, whether it was a stretch four in the non-con, whatever it is, it's done. Fans have turned on him. He has no confidence. Wes is losing confidence quickly in him. And then we've talked about the bigs. If you could park Fandago on one end of the floor and Jamil Reynolds on the other end of the floor, you'd have a hell of a player.
Yeah, but problem is playing them together doesn't work, and playing only one of them at a time, you're still not getting much production. I mean, UC and Xavier feel very similar all of a sudden, where neither one is getting anything out of their front court, and they're relying so heavily on the backcourt every game. But my thing with Victor Locken, Skinny, is I feel bad for the kid at this point. He's getting crushed by the fan base, so much so that Wes went out the other night and said, "We stand by Victor Locken, period," or whatever. And it's like, well, great, but why don't you help the kid out by changing it up for him? You put him in the starting lineup at the forward position where he's clearly not comfortable. He's clearly not equipped to play at the Big 12 level.
He's going to get introduced as a starter, and what's going to happen when that happens? Boo!
I mean, yeah, help the kid out a little bit, change up the scenery, bring him off the bench, play him at the center spot a little bit more. I mean, you end up subbing him out and then ultimately going small a lot of times anyway, which I understand that's what I'm asking for here. But why not just make that change when it's clearly not working for you at the beginning of games? A lot of times you're finding yourself behind the 8 ball over the first 5 to 10 minutes of action. I guess the good news, Skinny, is they have UCF coming up this weekend. They need a win, and that first game against UCF, they did win by 11 points. My only concern about that, though, is that was one of those Dan Skillings games where he went off and scored 21 points and played really well, and you're not getting that every night from Dan Skillings. So it's like, is UCF a good matchup for you if Dan Skillings doesn't go off offensively? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and it's on the road, and I do know they have a win at BYU, and I do know they have a win at Texas Tech, but it's still, you're not getting a lot of those on the road in this league. And, to me, and just the way this team's playing at the moment, we talked about the cumulative effect of those close losses. It felt like the Houston game carried over a bit to Iowa State. Maybe they felt the pressure of, we got to have this one because you start doing the math on this. I mean, to what we talked about last week, I think you're down now to having to go 5-2 down the stretch of the regular season, and it's going to be tough to not go better than 2-5 down the stretch of this season based on what the schedule is. I mean, I only count 2 automatic wins in Oklahoma State and West Virginia at home, and maybe Kansas State at home. But other than that, most everything else is damn near close to impossible to win. Again, the math of it's very hard, and the problem is I don't know what the answers are. CJ Frederick is not an answer. He's just a guy, and that's where I just don't know what the answers are for them. And I think they're still searching for answers.
Yeah, I think there's still a path for UC to get an at-large bid, but it's almost gone. I mean, they're basically where Xavier was before this last loss to Seton Hall. They're out of wiggle room. They, like you said, they can lose maybe another game or two, but that's over the course of the final 7, and that seems like that's going to be a tough path for them to get through. Let's move on to Xavier, which lost at home to Creighton 78-71 over the weekend, and then was embarrassed at Seton Hall 88-70 on Wednesday night. Xavier doesn't play again until next Wednesday when they host Providence, which is much needed. They need some time off and to think about what's going on here. I think this just goes back to what we've been saying all year, Skinny. If Quincy Oliveri, Desmond Claude, and Davion McKnight don't play well, this team isn't winning many games, at least not against quality competition.
To your point, Rick, I mean, again, the first stretch of the game, much like the UConn game where they couldn't get an easy basket and it just snowballed. And at that point, then you're just playing catch up, and you're not catching up against UConn or a Seton Hall on the road, not to the extent that they had to play catch up. It was ugly.
It was really ugly. And, it felt like a game in which these guys they didn't show up. I mean, you hate to say that. I hate the whole, you weren't ready to play thing, but you come out and it looked kind of like an open gym setting. They're making careless turnovers. The defense was soft. They're missing shots where it's kind of like, that's not a bad shot, but it's kind of like a haphazard shot. It didn't look like your whole heart was into it when you're taking it. There just wasn't a lot of conviction with anything they were doing. And everyone's going to bring up the fact that the Sean Miller rumors started on Wednesday afternoon before that game. And I get it. The way that they played in that game, you can say, look, this Xavier team's plenty bad enough that they can perform like that on their own without any need for outside distractions or anything. But when the outside distraction does happen on that same day, and then you play a totally uninspired first half like you did at Seton Hall in a do or die game for your season. I mean, the season's now pretty much over in terms of getting an at-large bid. Yeah. If you win that one, it's still the hope's alive a little bit. What other conclusion are people going to come to other than there might have been an outside distraction involved there with the Sean Miller rumors? Yeah,
it might have been slight, but I mean, again, the UConn, there was no distraction in the UConn game. And listen, I know UConn's on a different planet. We both agree with that. But at the same time,
those are two different things. Seton Hall, they match up much better against.
They do match up much better, and they beat them at home. But again, Seton Hall needs to get some wins too. And so I think you also faced a team that was desperate to get a big home win for themselves as well. Did it cost them a little? Maybe a little, but I think it goes back to the whole issue that's going on all year of you just get nothing from your front court on a consistent basis. Hell, you get less than nothing a lot of times, and that's the big difference.
Yeah, the final month of the season looks like it's going to be pretty difficult for Xavier fans here because it does feel like the at-large chances are pretty much gone now, and you've got this whole coaching rumor thing that's going to continue, I would imagine, because the only way it really stops is if Sean Miller comes out and says something publicly that he's not taking it. And even then, do you really believe that? Because, I mean, he turned down Arizona the first time.
I remember a Xavier coach who once said that.
I remember multiple who did that, right?
Yes.
And then, like, what are you even rooting for as a Xavier fan down the stretch? Do you want to see some signs of improvement from the young big men so that you have something to build on next year? Or are you rooting like, no, we want them to be as bad as possible, so the coaching staff feels like they need to 100% revamp the entire front court, which I'm sure they do anyways. But like, as a Xavier fan, I don't even know what you're rooting for here down the stretch. It really feels like things kind of fell apart after this game.
Yeah, that's the disappointing part. They kind of worked themselves back into, okay, start doing the math. If they can do this, this, and this, they don't have to do anything totally special. Just make sure you take care of this business with Creighton. Maybe go steal one on the road at a Butler or a Seton Hall. Well, now you lost to Creighton and lost on the road to Seton Hall. You still got Marquette 2 more times to play. The math is almost damn near impossible unless you did something spectacularly special like sweep Marquette.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's literally you go undefeated. I mean, you went out down the stretch now. I just, especially because this loss was so embarrassing. There's now some optics things involved. I mean, maybe 5-1 gets it done, but I don't even see that at this point, quite honestly. So, all right, let's move on to the Super Bowl, Skinny. We'll recap the Super Bowl. I know it's kind of old at this point, but we'll still give our thoughts here since we talked so much about it. The Chiefs beat the 49ers 25-22 in overtime. It was an incredibly boring first half. It got exciting right at the end there, Skinny. Was the payoff worth the wait in your opinion?
Yeah, I would say yes. The first half certainly felt like it dragged without question. But once the two teams got to rolling, it was punch, counter punch, punch, counter punch. Obviously, the storyline of did Kyle Shanahan handle the overtime correctly, which I think has been completely overblown in my opinion. We'll get to that, I'm sure. And again, give the Chiefs this. Like I said, I picked against them all during the playoffs, but until the king gets beaten, they're still the king. And it's funny. I thought about this the other day. Really the only quarterback who's had playoff success against Patrick Mahomes has been Joe Burrow. And think about this in 2021. Patrick Mahomes had 1 Super Bowl ring. Joe Burrow was playing for his first Super Bowl ring. Obviously, Joe Burrow and the Bengals don't get it. Since then, Patrick now has added 2 more to the collection to go up 3-0. How quickly has that come that's really made Patrick Mahomes kind of separate completely from the pack, the current pack?
6 straight AFC Championship game appearances since he became their starting quarterback. 4 Super Bowl appearances now, and you've won 3 of them. I mean, I know we just had Tom Brady, and quite honestly, the GOAT conversations and the dynasty conversations I find to be rather boring and annoying. But with Patrick Mahomes and what we're seeing right now, Skinny, this is pretty incredible. I mean, it is a worthwhile storyline. We're not talking about a guy who's just scratching the surface of it. We're talking about a guy who's accomplished a whole hell of a lot and still, in theory, has a lot of career to go. It feels like he's at the height of his powers. I guess I have a few other things I want to get from you from the game, but I do wonder, can the Bengals learn anything from this Chiefs Super Bowl run? Because this one felt like the hardest for them. This one felt like the most improbable for them. And I think most specifically, I look at their team and I think they might have the worst receiver room in all of football. And yet with Pat Mahomes, they win a championship. Do you take anything from that as a Bengals fan?
So to that question, because I want to tie it into T. Higgins for a second, which obviously starting next Tuesday, the 20th, is the first day that players can be franchise tagged. The deadline to do that is March 5th. So they don't have to do it that day, and they probably won't do it that day, although I would say the earlier they do it, if they're going to do it, the better, in case they're trying to tag and trade. It gives you more time to get trade offers before free agency. So I want to get that out there. It was not going to be a separate topic for us. But, the Chiefs, I think the thing you learn from them is you better have interior pass rush. Hello, Chris Jones. You better have good players in the secondary, which they drafted extraordinarily well last year to get that. And they have L'Jarius Sneed, who's an elite corner. You need to have an elite receiver in some capacity. They have that in Travis Kelce. The Bengals have that in Jamar Chase. Again, different receivers, but elite at their positions. And then if you have an elite quarterback, which I think we're all in agreement Joe Burrow is, he should be able to make the other receivers better. And I think Kansas City traded Tyreek Hill. They ain't missed a beat. Now, they're not as explosive. They're not as dynamic. He ain't slinging it 60 yards down the field to a streaking Tyreek Hill. But they lost Tyreek Hill, and they won 2 Super Bowls without him. To that point, again, I think they franchise tag T. I'm not going to be mad if they franchise tag T. But it shows you, would that $20.5 million be better spent elsewhere? like trying to make a run for a Chris Jones. Now, I think Kansas City's going to try to run him back if they can, but I think it shows you there's your formulas for success. And they've hit on some draft picks. The Bengals, the last couple of drafts haven't. The 21 draft, the only guys you got out of that were Chase and Evan McPherson. You missed on Jackson Carman. You missed on Deontay Smith, who, again, I think anything fourth round and up should be close to a hit. Doesn't have to be a home run, but those guys have to be somewhat contributors, in my opinion, and neither one of those are even close. They played, a handful of snaps on offense this season. The Dax Hill pick, I didn't crap on it. I'm not trying to relitigate this, but he was a slot corner in college. You tried to make a safety. That was a disaster. Now his future may be next year. We've talked about this. He's in for Mike Hilton as a slot corner. But the bottom line is, when you're paying for the quarterback, you're paying for at least one elite receiver. You're paying elite money for a left tackle in Orlando Brown. You're paying your defensive line. Excuse me. I'm doing these position by position looks each day, Rick. And I'm doing it where guys are under contract, who are free agents, what the Bengals will likely do, what they should do. When I started typing out the salaries for the defensive line, and I knew what they were in my head, but until you see it on paper, like, Jesus, God, they're paying a crap ton of money on the defensive front for these guys. When you start doing that, you better hit on the other position groups pick-wise who are under rookie contracts, and they haven't quite done that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have a few things from the game here. You mentioned the overtime situation. So basically, the 49ers win the toss. They elect to take the ball to start overtime, play with it first. The overtime rules have changed. Now both teams are going to get a chance to possess the ball. So everyone's losing their minds at Shanahan, saying he should have wanted the ball second, because then if you need the touchdown or the field goal, which completely changes your play calling, right? If you've got a third down situation like third and medium, you now know if you need a touchdown, that's 2 down territory. So your play calling is completely different. There's the advantage there. I assume that's basically what everyone's mad about. Maybe there's more to it that I'm not realizing. Did you have a big issue with him choosing to take the ball first?
I didn't, because you know what your defense is allowed to do? They're allowed to make a stop after you kick that field goal. I mean, by the rules, you're allowed for your 11 guys to stop their 11 guys.
And his defense is also gassed at the end of regulation.
Right. So this also bought them the time to catch their breath a little bit. Would have been nice if you're Kyle Shanahan to go down and score the touchdown, sure, but you got points on the board. And like I said, your 11 are, again, I think it's in the rules. I may have to go back to the rule book and see, but I think your 11 are allowed to stop their 11. I think there's a
that they changed that in 2022. You're allowed to do
that.
My
bad. Yeah, is it like an addendum to like Rule 21F C3? I believe.
Yeah, they added that with the new overtime rules at the same time, as the same year.
Correct.
Yeah,
and I know a lot's being made of his comments of, listen, I was thinking in terms of the third possession of matching them. I think that was probably stupid to say, because again, you kick the field goal to match them. They would have had to kick the field goal. I didn't understand that part of it, but I understand I don't mind the logic of taking it first. I don't. And again, to the point of the defense being gassed. All right, I feel good about my offense. We're going to roll down and get some points on the board here. And then they have to go. The pressure's on them, and they handle the pressure. Good for Kansas. How about we do this? How about we tip our cap to Kansas City and go, dude's elite. And yeah, I know he knew what he needed, and they converted a fourth down and all those things. Dude's just elite.
Also, you don't typically coach from the standpoint of like, what if we screw up?
Right.
You don't take the idea of like, hey, we're not going to score a touchdown here, so what should we do then? It's like, no, this is our plan of attack, and we are going to score a touchdown, and we're going to put the pressure on that. Like, whatever reason they had for doing it, I'm sure it wasn't because we might not score a touchdown here.
Right.
The idea was we are going to go down and score a touchdown, and we have that confidence in our guys. I don't have a big issue with it. I'm not saying it was right or wrong. You can make the argument the other way, certainly. I know fans get into all that stuff. They all play Madden, and they're very good at manipulating overtime rules and everything like that. I think maybe the bigger part of this was the 49ers players who admitted publicly that they didn't know the overtime rules. Right. I think that seemed to light more of a fire under this, but I'm like, that was really pretty irrelevant to what was going on, if we're being honest. I don't think that changed anything.
Once you kick the field goal and your players think you won, and you don't, nobody's charged, you tell your guys, okay, we have to go make a stop. Okay, they understand at that point, yeah, we have to now go make a stop, right? We're on the field. I'm with you. I thought that was overblown too.
Yeah. One of the other things that happened was the Travis Kelce incident on the sideline with Andy Reid screaming in his face, kind of bumping into him aggressively because he wasn't in a red zone play where they ended up fumbling the ball away. A huge deal made out of this. Credit to the broadcast, by the way. They had this nailed. They had great video of it. They talked about it right away. They also had the Dre Greenlaw injury right away where he blew his Achilles. I mean, I thought the broadcast was all over. Tony Romo was incredibly annoying down the stretch because he wouldn't shut up. Was. But early in the broadcast, in terms of like having the elements and having the storylines, they were freaking on top of it. It was pretty good. But what did you think about the Travis Kelce situation with Andy Reid?
So I thought our guy Mo Egger hit this one on the head. I don't know if you heard him this week talking about this on ESPN 1530. When you win, things like that are forgotten because it points to he's just a competitor. He's got caught up in the moment. And he alluded to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, hey, he punched teammates, but he just hated to lose and he exuded. And when they won, you go, okay. If they'd have lost that, I think it would have been a bigger deal. And I think probably rightfully so a bigger deal. I know after the game they did the kumbaya, we love each other, it's heat of the moment. I mean, let's not forget, Kelce had that crazy incident with the Raider game earlier this year, back on Christmas Day, where he slammed his helmet down on the side. I mean, at some point, dude, I get your competitiveness, but chill out a little bit. But the bottom line is, you get a pass when you win. You get a pass for those circumstances when you win, whether that's right or not.
I don't think that this is going to be a big deal or anything. And I didn't find it to be a big deal when it happened. I agree with Mo. It's going to be forgotten. It's going to be looked at as competitiveness. But I did find it interesting how many NFL players immediately responded on social media. It was like, what? That's crazy. That's beyond the pale. That's like stepping over the line, all of that stuff. Like immediately there were a lot of players who called him out on it. And normally when something like that happens in the heat of the game, it's like, Tom Izzo can act like he's going to punch one of his players in the face, and almost every former athlete immediately jumps in and is like, you fans don't get it. You never played the game. This is just how the interactions go in the heat of the battle type of thing. But with this one, it was immediately like, that's crossing a line. That's too much. You can't do that to your head coach. I found that to be interesting. So it's like, if all the professional athletes aren't even going to have his back in this situation when they almost always defend that type of behavior, it kind of says something to me about that. That did seem to be a little bit egregious.
And listen, while I don't have Taylor Swift fatigue, I completely have Travis Kelce fatigue. I mean, his whole Viva Las Vegas nonsense and fight for your right to party, I don't even find that clever.
He's a bad WWE wrestling promo at all times.
Yes,
and the part of the thing is he's an idiot. Like, he basically flunked out of UC and his brother got him back on the team. They kicked him off multiple. The guy was an idiot while he was at UC. We all knew that. Everybody knew it behind the scenes in local media. And now he's become a big star because he's really talented. He dates Taylor Swift, which is great. And they're all going to parade him around like they're so proud of him at UC. But like, they also all knew he was an idiot while he was there, and he was not a great guy either. So none of this stuff is surprising. The one that is surprising to me, Skinny, is everyone seems to be wanting to hate, especially in Cincinnati, wants to hate the Chiefs. And with that, they want to hate Patrick Mahomes. I find him incredibly hard to hate.
I do too. I'm with you. I mean, I told you, I think I said this. I don't know if I said this on the podcast or I told it to people privately, and I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary saying this, but after the Bengals lost to the Chiefs, I kind of followed Zach Taylor out of the locker room when I got done with the locker room to go out and do a stand-up for TV on the field, and you had to walk down the thing. I didn't say anything to him. I'm not bothering. He's in his own world. Patrick Mahomes is sitting on a cart at the end of the tunnel we're walking down. And Zach, I thought, classically walked up and said, hey, good luck to you guys in the playoffs. I admire your work, or something along those lines. And Patrick said, hey, tell Joe get better. I look forward to playing against him again soon. And I thought that was kind of cool. And it's one of those ones where nobody was watching them do that. Nobody was watching Patrick have that response. It was just a nice human response. And I think to that point, I like watching him play. I like the way he plays. He's a winner. All those things. And I get it. They've become a nice rival. But I think you tip your cap to him and go, there's the standard. That's the standard that we have to get past. And when we do, maybe we make a run.
How do you hate a guy with that voice? Like, you can't take that seriously as a villain when he talks like he does.
That's a good point.
Give me your Patrick Mahomes impression. I know you've got a good one.
I can't do it. No, I can't do it. I wish I could. I don't have that voice in me. I have cookie monster in me. I can't do Pat's voice.
Yeah, it's tough. It'd be a great impression if you could nail it, because it is a very funny voice. I'm trying to think of like something you'd say.
180.
I mean, the guys, they just really had my back. It's kind of like a.
By the way, I completely forgot to watch. Who did he thank first?
Well, in his MVP statement, he didn't really thank anybody. If anything, he mentioned his teammates first. But down on the field, when they interviewed him right after the game, like the on the field interview, which that didn't count for the bet, he immediately like had a cross untucked and he said something about God. So people were texting me and tweeting at me saying, Pat Mahomes, big God guy. The value was on God, but I don't think that would have counted for for the bet. So one last question here, Skinny. Were there any favorite commercials you had from the game?
Honestly, about the only two were the Duncan one, and then I guess with the YouTube one with the Seahawks and whatever the flying thing, those were honestly the two most clever ones. Those were good.
The Dunk Kings was my favorite with Affleck and Damon and Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady kind of won the Super Bowl from a commercial standpoint because he was in that one, and then the other one that I liked was the Bet MGM. Tom has won enough already.
Oh yeah.
But like you've already won enough, and they went through all the other weird celebrities and stuff like that. The only other one that I thought was kind of funny was the Etsy one. I don't know if you saw with the Statue of Liberty.
I don't think I did.
Where it was like going back to the time where like France gave us the Statue of Liberty, and it's like one of our forefathers looking out and go, "Oh crap, that's a pretty good gift." And then so the idea is he gets on Etsy and buys them a charcuterie board, and the French are like, "Yeah, cheese board, all right." Yeah,
I didn't see that one. That's pretty clever.
Yeah, it was all right. Ask anything. We mentioned pitchers and catchers.
Wait a minute, how do we do on our bets?
Oh, I'll tell you next show. I didn't even think about it. I won. I didn't win overall, but I won the game because I had the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think I had the under, and I think I know I had San Francisco, so I think I
had the Chiefs in the over, so I won those two.
I think I did win the coin toss, right? It was head.
You won the coin toss. I lost. I lost over longest rush for Christian McCaffrey. I lost Travis Kelce touchdown.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're piling up losses here.
Yeah. I don't hear a lot of wins on your end. You were 0 for 2 in the game, and you're one.
No, it was 1-1. I had the under. It was under 47.5.
Okay, yeah, I guess you did hit the. I thought with other time it would have hit the over, but you're right. It was still
25-22. Yeah.
All right. Well, you won overall, but I will have a final tally next week. I'm sorry, I was traveling this week. I didn't add those up.
All good.
So we mentioned pitchers and catchers reporting. So what is your top storyline heading into Red Spring training? That was our first question, Skinny.
I think how the rotation shakes out. It's funny. I mentioned my boss and I kind of combined to do call it a Reds primer, just a thumb sucker to put up of, who's new on the team, who's lost, who's probably locked up rotation spots, who's battling for rotation spots, bullpen. I mean, there's like 5 guys battling for one bullpen spot. There's 3 guys really battling for one backup outfield spot. I mean, this roster feels pretty set, but the rotation to me is the one. Because when push came to shove and I wrote it down, and I even told my boss, I said, you can change this if you disagree with how I put these. I said, you're usually good about this too. So the rotation spots I think are locked in are Hunter Green, Montas, and Andrew Abbott. Lodolo's not been completely cleared yet health-wise. He's expected to be. Neither is Graham Ashcraft. Those two would make the other 2, in my opinion, but they're going to have to show they're healthy. Ashcraft coming back from the toe surgery, and Lodolo with the stress thing in his tibia. And then Brandon Williamson and Connor Phillips are probably the other 2 candidates. So to me, it's how does that rotation shake out to me, I think is the biggest part. Because we mentioned this, you're going to have a couple of pretty good arms starting the year in Louisville. And that doesn't include the kid they drafted from Wake Forest last year that they think can be in the big leagues sooner rather than later. It doesn't include Chase Petty, who was acquired in the Sonny Gray trade and is kind of fast tracking through the system. So you've got a lot of depth in the rotation. It's a matter of how does it shake out at the big league level. That to me is the biggest one. How about for you?
I'll go with the same. I would say the pitching rotation as well. The Jonathan India storyline, where he's going to slot in now that he's signed this 2-year extension, is interesting because I don't see a natural spot for him right now as we enter. And we're talking about maybe playing the outfield and other positions, but the outfield doesn't really seem realistic for him. I don't know.
In fact, when I did a lineup, a lineup that they would use most days against righties and one against lefties, and the only place I could slot him in was as a DH against lefties.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like before you even talk about Jamer Candelario. Right? I mean, even then, like before him, it's hard to find a spot. Now with him at the corners, it's really difficult to slot him into a lineup, even on spot duty. So I'm curious to see how that all shakes down. But they seem to have a lot of trust in him, so they're going to keep running him out there somehow. And
I'll be honest with you, Jamer Candelario is actually, if you look at his splits, his career OPS is better, not by much, it's like 774 to 770. It's better against left-handed pitching than it is against right-handed pitching. So if he's going to play, let's just say he plays first base against lefties, and then where are you going to put Christian Encarnacion and Strand? I think I'd DH him over Jonathan Indy, to be quite frank.
Yeah, those are the 2 for me, the rotation in India, I would say. Would Skinny be in favor of relegation in the MLB as it's implemented in the Premier League?
If you had another league to go to, I mean, I don't. Would we relegate them to AAA and bring up a couple of AAA teams? That doesn't seem feasible.
Doesn't work.
You have to have another like major league that could be relegated to and brought up, right?
Yeah, I think people bring up relegation for every sport that doesn't have it. And they always say, like, wouldn't it be great if it had it? The only sport that I feel like actually would be great for is college sports. Because the conference thing is such a natural fit to be like, you bump up a conference level, you drop down a conference level. That would be so great.
How many D1 teams are there at the moment? Like
367, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say 363 was a number, but yeah, that's that. We're in the same page. So how about you just split that down the middle and you have Division 1 and Division 1A like you used to have in football, and teams get relegated each year from one to the other.
I don't hate that, but I even like the idea better of like, I'm an A10 school right now, and I can jump to the Big East with an average record of this over the next 2 years or something like that, you know?
And get the Big East money, get the Big East chunk of the pie as opposed to the A10 chunk of the pie.
Yes, and DePaul's ass is back down in the A10 playing
fair enough.
Charlotte, you know?
I like that.
Is Charlotte still in the A10? I don't think they are.
No, Charlotte's in the Sun Belt, maybe?
Conference
USA. No, maybe the American.
Oh, yeah, they're in the American now. That's right. They're doing well. That's their whole big storyline this year. What is Skinny's opinion on why Dave Parker has not been indicted into the – it says indicted. They meant inducted. Inducted in the Hall of Fame when he has better numbers than most recent inductees. Is it punishment for Pirates' drug scandal?
I think it is, unfortunately, because I've written a column about that of five players with Reds ties that would be candidates for the Hall of Fame. Dave Parker, honestly, is a better player than Scott Rowland. And I'm not besmirching Scott Rowland. They played different positions. But you can go back and look at his numbers, and Dave Parker has better numbers than a lot of Hall of Famers. He's got a MVP, if not two MVPs. He's got a World Series ring. Just a great hitter, and it's disappointing that he is not in the Hall of Fame. I think he clearly deserves it. What is Skinny giving up for Lent? I'm not Catholic, so I don't give up stuff for Lent usually. I'm not. I don't. I do the fish fry stuff or a slice of pizza on Friday for whatever reason. But yeah, I'm not giving up. I don't give up anything for Lent. I really don't. How about you? Do you? I was raised Catholic, but I'm definitely not giving up anything, and I'm eating ground beef every Friday. So there you go. Yeah. What is? I'm sorry, we already asked that one. If there was one Mo Egger and then a second Mo Egger arrived, how do you refer to them in plural? Is it Mo Eggers, Mo's Egger, the Cajun style MEAUX Egger, or the idiot email lady at work style Mo Egger 'S? That's the one to me. It would be the Mo Egger 'S, because there is that person of that's a singular apostrophe you're using that. Or you could just do this, Moses. It's plural. Moses Egger. Moses Egger. There's a Moses over there. I could do that. All right, and we'll finish up with Mo's question here. Please rank the following careers from worst to best. I'll read off these names real quick, and then you have the ranking for us, correctly? Yes, I do. Right. Tom Chambers, Henry Cotto, Cecil Espy, yes, Marianne Mobley, yep, Melvin Tootin, yep, Jim Longborg, Tony Massenberg, Peter Tamarkin, Kent Oberkfell, and actually it's Kent Oberkfell. He put Kent on there, but it's Kent Oberkfell. Played for the Cardinals and the Giants in the 80s. All right. So I know like three of these people. All right, tell me the three that you know, because I'm interested. I'm sure you know Tony Massenberg and Tom Chambers. Tom Chambers and Henry Cotto, I know, and that's it. Okay. So here we go. Ranking them from worst to first. Worst on the list is Paul Justin, was a Bengals and Indianapolis Colts backup quarterback. Made 10 career NFL starts, and with the Bengals, he was 0-3. That's a good place to start at number 10, correct? That is a good place to start. Number 9 is the other Bengal on this list, Melvin Tootin. Big Melvin Rootin' Tootin was a third-round pick of the Bengals in 1995. Made only 9 starts for the Bengals. And actually, his claim to fame was he caught a touchdown pass in his rookie year on a tackle-eligible play, but he's number 9 on the list. Number 8, the great, you stumbled on his word a little bit, the great Cecil Espy. Cecil had 304 career hits across his major league career, finished his career with the Reds in 1993, a 622 career OPS. Not good. And he's where we get the Espy Award from. That's correct. Wrong. Next is one of the guys you know, Henry Cotto. I made notes about each one of these. I knew all these people. I just had to go look some stuff up just to have some talking points. He was a decent fourth outfielder with the Cubs and Mariners, 569 career hits and a 669 OPS. He's at the bottom of the list, but not completely. He's not worse than Paul Justin. He's not worse than Melvin Tootin. He's not worse than Cecil Espy. He comes in at 7. Number 6 is Tony Massenberg, who somehow played 13 undistinguished NBA seasons, played a couple of other seasons in Spain, did have 4,000 career points and 2,900 career rebounds. So he comes in 6th on the list. Right below, Ken Oberkfell. Ken Oberkfell's major league career was a solid one with the Cardinals and Giants mostly. Played a little bit with the Braves and Pirates. 1,354 career hits, a 713 career OPS. He was the third baseman on the Cardinals' 1982 World Series championship team, was a starter on the 1989 San Francisco Giants World Series team that lost the earthquake Bay Bridge series to the Oakland Athletics, and had an okay career, so he comes in at number 5. Number 4 is Peter Tomarkin. Can you guess what Peter Tomarkin might have been?
A gun manufacturer.
Not even close. He was a game show host who was the original host of the show Pressure Luck. You know the No Whammies show?
Yeah, I do know.
No Whammies, No Whammies. He was the original host for that. He was an actor who played a lot of cameo roles. In fact, I was watching an old rerun of Rockford Files on MeTV. It's not on there anymore, but it was on for a while. I love the Rockford Files with James Garner. And I looked, I go, damn, that doesn't look like Peter Tomarkin. And I looked it up at that point in time, like 2 or 3 years ago. Peter Tomarkin was in that show. He tragically died in a small plane crash taking off from the Long Beach airport back in the mid-2000s. But he's number 4 on the list. Number 3, Jim Lonborg, pitcher for the Boston Red Sox and Philadelphia Phillies, faced the Big Red Machine in the playoffs in 76 as a member of the Phillies. 157 career wins. Won a Cy Young in 1967 when he won 22 games and helped the Red Sox come from nowhere to win the American League pennant that season. He also competed in one All-Star game. Number 2, a guy that you knew as well, Tom Chambers, 4-time All-Star, 20,000 career points, just a little bit over it. He is actually 50th in NBA history in scoring. That's a good solid number 2 on the list, right?
That's very good. Yeah, I thought he was going to be number 1 personally.
Nope. Number 1 is Mary Ann Mobley, and I'll just stop with this. She was an actress in many shows and films, but Miss America 1959.
1959?
That trumps Tom Chambers on the list. Miss America trumps 4-time All-Star Tom Chambers. Come on now.
That's fair. I'm looking up pictures. She does look beautiful, but the pictures are in black and white. So
that's correct.
She's a little long in the tooth now, I'd say.
I think she passed, I believe.
Well, that would definitely make her long in the tooth.
She was married to actor and pitchman, and you probably may remember him if I say his name, Gary Collins. Do you remember Gary Collins at all?
I mean, in fairness, Gary Collins is like the most. I've known probably 12 Gary Collins since I've been alive.
Google Gary Collins, and as soon as you look at me, you go, oh, I remember seeing that guy. He pitched some products and did some game show stuff, and he was around.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly the reaction I had. Yeah,
I've
seen that guy.
Yeah, I figured you saw that guy.
He's got the fakest smile ever.
Yeah, for sure. So you may disagree. You may want to flip Tom Chambers and Mary Ann Mobley, but for me, Miss America in any year, that's a pretty good run, man.
Look, I was only saying that before I knew who Mary Ann Mobley was. I'm all in on the Mobley bus now.
So there we go. Paul Justin at 10, Melvin Tootin at 9, Cecil Espy 8, Henry Cotto 7, Tony Massenberg 6, Ken Oberkfell 5, Peter Tomarkin 4, Jim Lonborg 3, Tom Chambers 2, Mary Ann Mobley number 1.
That was just a beautiful segment of podcasting right there, and that's all I've got.
That's all I've got. Appreciate it very much. We'll be back next week to talk some more college.
Sure, you could stop watching now, but let's be honest, you want to see more. So click some of those links, or better yet, go ahead and tap subscribe. That way you'll catch more content from Local 12.